Welcome back to Restful Historian. Tonight, we delve into the extraordinary life of Achilles, a hero whose story is as grand as it is tragic. His destiny, marked by eternal glory and an early death, began with the unusual union of Peleus, a renowned mortal king, and Thetis, a radiant immortal Nereid, a goddess of the sea. Their unique love, though divine, carried a heavy prophecy. Their son's life, despite his future greatness, was foretold to be short. His divine mother, Thetis, driven by immense love and a desperate desire to prevent this heartbreaking outcome, tried everything within her immortal power. In a magical ritual, she carefully immersed her infant son, the tender baby Achilles, in the sacred waters of the legendary river Styx. This mythical river, flowing through the very underworld, possessed an ancient, potent magic. As its sacred waters touched his skin, they bestowed upon the hero an extraordinary gift, making him virtually invulnerable to harm. Yet, in that pivotal moment of divine intervention, a single, tiny point remained untouched: his ankle. Held firmly by his mother's hand, it alone had not come into contact with the protecting waters, leaving it as his one solitary weak point. Raised not in royal courts, but amidst the green plains of Phthia, young Achilles grew up under the unique tutelage of Chiron, the wise and noble centaur. Far from the ordinary world, Achilles received meticulous training. He learned not only the formidable crafts of war, how to wield a spear and shield with unmatched skill, but also the profound wisdom of the ages, the intricacies of healing, and the subtle arts of music and prophecy. Under Chiron's unparalleled guidance, he blossomed into a warrior beyond compare, destined to become the greatest and most formidable of all Greek warriors. During these formative years, Achilles found true companionship. Among his training companions were the incredibly strong warrior Ajax of Salamis, a man of immense physical might and unwavering courage. And then there was the noble Patroclus, a loyal and gentle soul. Though not of divine birth, Patroclus became the closest confidant and truest brother-in-arms to Peleus's extraordinary son. Achilles and Patroclus forged a deep, unwavering bond of brotherly love, a connection so profound that it would ultimately and tragically change the fate of the coming war, altering the course of history itself. As the ominous shadow of the Trojan War began to loom and the call to arms resonated across Greece, King Agamemnon, the powerful leader of the Achaean forces, summoned Achilles to join the massive expedition. But Achilles' ever-watchful mother, Thetis, still desperately clinging to any hope of diverting his tragic destiny, forced her son to hide. She arranged for him to conceal himself as a woman among the daughters of King Lycomedes on the island of Scyros. This was her last desperate measure, a poignant maternal gamble to prevent her beloved son from sailing to Troy and inevitably meeting his foretold tragic fate upon its fabled fields. However, the cunning and resourceful hero Odysseus, renowned for his sharp intellect and unmatched guile, quickly discerned the disappearance of the young, unparalleled warrior. His keen mind soon found Achilles' unlikely hiding place. When confronted, Achilles, despite his mother's divine order and his personal longing for a longer life, made his choice. The hero, understanding the weight of duty to his homeland and the immense pull of his own burgeoning glory, did not truly wish to escape the coming conflict. He had gone into hiding only to comply with his divine mother's fervent wish, but the call of destiny, the magnetic pull of his true nature, proved far too powerful to resist. He was ready to answer the summons to war. As the great heroes began to gather, ready to set sail for the distant shores of Troy, a profound tension arose almost immediately. This assembly, meant to unite the might of Greece, instead witnessed the first major disagreement between Achilles and Agamemnon, the very leader of the expedition. Their clash was not over spoils or strategy, but a matter far more sacred and unsettling. The great king, Agamemnon, resorted to a desperate deception. He cunningly used Achilles' revered name to lure Queen Clytemnestra and her innocent daughter, Princess Iphigenia, to the shores of Aulis where the fleet was massing. Through a false letter, Agamemnon ordered the queen to bring her daughter to the camp, claiming she was to marry Achilles, a powerful alliance that would surely please the gods and ensure victory. But this was all a terrible fabrication, a cruel lie designed to lure Iphigenia to the camp for a horrifying purpose. She was to be sacrificed. The goddess, Artemis, angered by an earlier offense, or perhaps by the very arrogance of the Greek forces, had held the winds captive, preventing the fleet from sailing. Only the sacrifice of a royal maiden, Agamemnon believed, would appease the goddess's wrath and allow their massive armada to depart. When Achilles heard of this treacherous scheme, he was absolutely furious. His renowned rage, usually reserved for the battlefield, ignited against Agamemnon's monstrous plan. He vehemently declared that no one would dare touch Iphigenia without first having to face him in battle. He saw it as a profound betrayal, a desecration of his honor, and a cruel abuse of power. But to Achilles' profound surprise, and indeed to the astonishment of all gathered, Iphigenia herself made a truly remarkable decision. Despite the terror of her impending fate, the young princess chose to accept the will of the gods. With a quiet courage that belied her years, she declared that she would sacrifice herself willingly, for the greater good of all Greece, for the future of their expedition to Troy. Her selfless act, born of a solemn acceptance of divine will, allowed the winds to finally shift, filling the sails of the waiting ships. With the goddess appeased and the fleet now able to move, the Grand Armada prepared for its long journey. Achilles, a figure of immense power and destiny, set sail for Troy in command of 50 sleek ships. With him were his formidable warriors, the Myrmidons, the brave and loyal fighting force from Phthia. They were a disciplined and fearsome contingent, ready to follow their peerless leader wherever the tides of war might take them. The stage was now set for the most legendary conflict in ancient history, and Achilles, despite the dark omens and the troubling actions of his own king, was finally on his way to his foretold glory and his ultimate tragic fate. Upon their arrival on the distant sandy shores of Troy, a land steeped in ancient legends and formidable defenses, Achilles and his extraordinary Myrmidons immediately began to demonstrate their unparalleled prowess in the demanding art of war. The very air, charged with the promise of prolonged conflict, soon bore witness to his unmatched abilities. Achilles' presence on the battlefield was transformative, almost legendary even in those early days. His renowned speed, his formidable strength, and his exquisite skill with both spear and sword were truly an awe-inspiring spectacle. He moved with a grace that belied the brutality of combat, striking with lethal precision, a testament to his unique lineage and the rigorous training he had received under the wise centaur, Chiron. The Trojan forces, who had long been accustomed to facing the more conventional armies of their time, found themselves utterly unprepared, indeed overwhelmed, by the sheer devastating force and terrifying efficiency embodied by Peleus' son. In the initial engagements that followed the massive Achaean landing, Achilles appeared as an unstoppable force, a whirlwind of gleaming bronze and controlled fury, tirelessly carving a relentless path through enemy ranks with an almost effortless motion, breaking their lines and sowing chaos wherever he moved. He consistently spearheaded the most challenging assaults, charging towards seemingly impenetrable defenses that had for generations defied hostile incursions. With a combination of raw power and tactical genius, he scattered vast formations of Trojan soldiers, driving them back, seeking desperate refuge within the high, protective walls of their formidable city. His fearsome reputation quickly resonated throughout the Troad, echoing from village to city. His name became a chilling whisper among his enemies, instilling a profound, paralyzing fear in their hearts, while simultaneously bolstering the spirits and rekindling the flagging hope of the often beleaguered Achaean army, who now, perhaps for the first time in their long campaign, truly saw in him their greatest irreplaceable hope for ultimate victory. However, Achilles' immense impact extended far beyond the immediate chaotic confines of the main battlefield, the direct clashes outside the city gates. The entire enterprise of the Trojan War was not a swift, decisive campaign, but a protracted siege that stretched on for many weary, unproductive years, a grueling stalemate against the heavily fortified city of Troy. To sustain their vast forces, to prevent morale from crumbling under the immense psychological and physical strain of prolonged inactivity, and to gradually weaken their stubborn enemy by cutting off their resources and supplies, the Greeks frequently engaged in systematic raids. These targeted operations were launched against the numerous surrounding cities and towns that were either allied to Troy or offered strategic value due to their wealth or location. He consistently led his myrmidons in swift, decisive campaigns, moving with a speed and precision that caught their opponents off guard. They would storm fortified towns with unyielding determination, overcoming fierce and often desperate resistance from their defenders. Upon victory, they would return to the main Greek camp, their sturdy ships arriving laden, their holds overflowing with the valuable spoils of war, gleaming piles of gold and silver, bolts of fine textiles woven with intricate patterns, precious artifacts steeped in local history and cultural significance, and vast stores of vital provisions. All of these were meticulously collected from the conquered settlements. These captured riches were absolutely essential. They helped to finance the demanding ongoing siege, providing vital resources and much-needed sustenance for the relentless Achaean war effort, an endeavor that, at times, felt like an insurmountable, never-ending task, draining their will and their supplies. But among these tangible, material spoils of war, Achilles often claimed prizes that were, to him, far more significant than mere wealth or strategic goods. In one particularly impactful raid, on a prosperous city named Lyranessus, Achilles and his elite men decisively conquered the city, slaying its king and tragically taking its inhabitants captive. Among these unfortunate captives was a woman of extraordinary beauty, of noble lineage, named Briseis. She was the daughter of Briss, a priest, and had been the beloved wife of King Minos of Lyranessus before its catastrophic fall. Her capture was not just an act of war. It was a deeply personal acquisition for Achilles, a customary, albeit harsh, practice in that ancient era that symbolized a warrior's success and honor. Briseis was then brought back to the bustling, often chaotic Greek camp, becoming a quiet yet constant presence within Achilles' private tent. Their relationship, though undeniably born from conquest and the brutal realities of war, gradually, subtly, deepened over time. It transcended the simple dynamic of captor and captive. A complex, unspoken affection, perhaps even a profound, unexpected understanding, began to bloom between the fierce, often isolated warrior and the gentle, dignified, captured queen. She steadily became more than just a possession to him. She was more than just another spoil of war. Briseis represented a different kind of treasure, something deeply personal and emotionally significant, a quiet sanctuary amidst the overwhelming, often dehumanizing violence that defined his days and nights. Her presence offered a measure of solace, a sense of calm and companionship, a poignant counterpoint to the relentless bloodshed. She was a connection to a different life, a source of peace in a world consumed by conflict. Unbeknownst to all at that crucial moment, this burgeoning bond, this quiet affection, would soon play a profoundly pivotal role in the unfolding drama of the Trojan War. It would ignite a calamitous conflict, not with the enemy outside the walls, but among the Greek leaders themselves, a devastating dispute that would lead to immense suffering, to profound loss, and ultimately to a pivotal shift that would ripple with devastating consequences through the entire Achaean army, testing the very limits of their unity and their collective resolve. For in the claiming of Briseis, and in the deep, growing attachment he felt for her, Achilles had unknowingly set in motion a chain of fateful events, a series of consequences that would challenge his deepest loyalties, provoke his legendary rage, and irrevocably alter the course of his magnificent yet tragic destiny. The stage was now set for a confrontation far more perilous than any battle with the Trojans. As the long, arduous siege of Troy continued, and the Achaean forces grappled with the ebb and flow of battle. An internal conflict, far more devastating than any clash with the Trojans, began to brew. This fateful dispute ignited over the sacred practice of war prizes, and it brought the very leadership of the Greek army to the brink of collapse. The immediate catalyst was a plague, a terrible affliction sent by the god Apollo, whose priest Chryses had appealed to him. Chryses had come to the Achaean camp seeking to ransom his daughter Chryseis, who had been captured and given as a prize to King Agamemnon himself. Agamemnon, in his arrogance, had publicly refused to return her, mocking the priest and further inflaming Apollo's divine wrath. The plague spread relentlessly through the Greek ranks, claiming countless lives, until a seer revealed the true cause: Apollo's fury at Agamemnon's disrespect. To appease the vengeful god and save his army from utter annihilation, Agamemnon was ultimately forced to relinquish Chryseis, returning her to her father. This was a significant blow to the king's pride and his authority, a public humiliation he deeply resented. But rather than simply accepting this consequence, Agamemnon, consumed by his wounded ego and a desire for compensation, immediately demanded a new prize, one that would restore his perceived honor and assert his dominance over the other Greek leaders. His gaze fell upon the most cherished possession of their greatest warrior. He demanded Briseis. Achilles, who had grown deeply fond of Briseis, a relationship that transcended the simple dynamic of warrior and captive, was utterly outraged by Agamemnon's arrogant demand. To him, it was not merely about possessing a woman. It was a profound insult to his honor, a direct challenge to his unparalleled status among the Achaeans, and a blatant act of disrespect for his sacrifices on the battlefield. His legendary rage, a force as fearsome as his combat skill, flared to a terrifying intensity. He came perilously close to drawing his sword and striking down Agamemnon right there, in front of the assembled chieftains, a moment that would have irrevocably shattered the Greek alliance. But at that critical juncture, the goddess Athena, ever watchful, intervened. She appeared to Achilles alone, unseen by the others, pulling him back by his hair and whispering words of restraint, urging him to control his temper and consider the dire consequences of such an act. Consumed by resentment, his spirit boiling with injustice, Achilles made a momentous decision that would send shockwaves through the entire Achaean camp. He declared that he and his formidable Myrmidons would no longer fight alongside the Greeks. He would withdraw from the battle, refusing to lift a spear or shield against the Trojans as long as Agamemnon's injustice remained unaddressed. This was not a mere tantrum. It was a deliberate, strategic withdrawal of the most crucial fighting force, a calculated act of defiance designed to force Agamemnon to acknowledge his error and suffer the consequences. The immediate impact of Achilles' absence and the withdrawal of his valiant Myrmidons was devastating. The Achaeans, now deprived of their most fearsome warrior, began to pay a terrible price on the battlefield. Without Achilles' unparalleled might and morale-boosting presence, the tide of war swiftly turned. The Trojans, led by their valiant champion Hector, seized this unprecedented opportunity. They pushed the Greeks relentlessly, driving them back from the open plain, forcing them into a desperate retreat towards their own ships beached on the shore. The fighting became fierce and desperate, with the Trojans even managing to breach the Greek defenses, setting fire to some of the vital Achaean ships, threatening to trap the entire army and destroy their means of return. The air became thick with the sounds of their desperate struggle, the clash of bronze, the shouts of commanders, the groans of the wounded, and the crackle of flames against timber. The situation for the Greeks quickly became hopeless, their lines faltering, their courage waning under the renewed Trojan onslaught. They suffered immense casualties, their bravest warriors falling one after another, as the shadow of defeat loomed large over the entire expedition. This bitter conflict between their two greatest leaders had brought the Achaean cause to the very brink of disaster, proving that even divine favor could not overcome internal strife. The war, which had seemed destined for eventual Greek victory, was now teetering on the edge, all because of the wounded pride of a king and the furious wrath of his greatest hero. As the Achaean forces spiraled deeper into utter despair, suffering truly terrible, relentless losses without their greatest champion, the once unbreakable spirit of the Greeks began to visibly waver and fracture. The very morale of the vast army was crumbling under the strain, replaced by a suffocating sense of panic and the grim certainty of imminent defeat. The Trojans, emboldened beyond measure by Achilles' devastating absence from the battlefield, pressed their advantage with a ferocity they had not shown in years, pushing the Achaeans ever closer to the desperate refuge of their beached ships. Flames, ignited by Trojan torches, roared from burning vessels, casting an ominous, flickering glow across the entire Greek encampment, painting the encroaching night with hues of savage red and angry orange, a stark and terrifying symbol of their impending annihilation, threatening to consume their means of escape and trap them forever on the hostile shores of Troy. The air was thick with the cacophony of their desperate struggle, the clamor of clashing bronze on bronze, the triumphant, chilling shouts of the Trojan warriors drawing nearer, the agonizing groans of the wounded and dying, echoing across the plain, and the desperate, often futile cries of Greek commanders attempting to rally their faltering lines. From the relative safety of Achilles' tent, a vantage point where he had stubbornly remained, Patroclus, Achilles' faithful companion and beloved brother-in-arms, could no longer bear to watch this unfolding disaster. His heart, usually so gentle, was now heavy with the profound agony of his suffering comrades, and the dire, undeniable turn of the war. He felt an overwhelming sense of urgency, a desperate need to act before all was lost. With a spirit brimming with a blend of love, loyalty, and a profound sense of duty, Patroclus approached Achilles. His noble face, usually composed, was now etched with a deep sorrow and a plea born of utter desperation. He spoke not with anger or accusation, but with a profound, heartfelt earnestness, begging his friend to finally set aside his stubborn anger and crushing pride. He implored Achilles to return to the battlefield, if only for a short time, to help the embattled Achaeans, whose very lives were being extinguished. He passionately described the countless Greek lives being tragically lost, falling like wheat. Achilles also allowed Patroclus to lead the Myrmidons, his fierce, disciplined, and utterly loyal warriors, back into the fray, knowing their collective prowess alone could make a decisive difference. But with this immense privilege came solemn, strict warnings, delivered with a grave tone. Achilles cautioned Patroclus to only drive the Trojans away from the threatened ships and back towards the protective walls of their city. Under no circumstances was he to pursue them further, beyond that initial life-saving push, lest he incur the wrath of the gods who favored Troy, or worse, meet a stronger, more dangerous opponent like Hector, who might see through the disguise. Patroclus, his courageous spirit rekindled by this sacred trust and the glimmer of renewed hope, eagerly donned the awe-inspiring armor of Achilles. The magnificent helmet, adorned with its towering plume, settled upon his head. The gleaming breastplate covered his chest, reflecting the sunlight, and the famed shield, heavy and strapped to his arm. With the roaring cheers of the desperate Greeks rising around him, their morale instantly revived at the sight of Achilles. And leading the thunderous charge of the Myrmidons, he plunged fearlessly into the thickest part of the battle. His sudden appearance, cloaked in the unmistakable glory and terrifying aura of Achilles, had an immediate and dramatic effect. The Trojans, indeed believing that Achilles himself had returned to the fight, were momentarily stunned, their confident advance faltering, as utter terror gripped their hearts and they began to flee in disarray. Patroclus, fighting with an almost superhuman valor inspired by the armor and the urgency of his mission, rallied the wavering Greek lines with incredible success. He skillfully drove the Trojans back from the Achaean camp, extinguished the dangerous fires on the ships, and relentlessly pushed the enemy further and further across the plain, even killing many prominent Trojan warriors. He fought with such overwhelming ferocity that he began to exceed Achilles' original, cautious instructions in his overwhelming zeal for victory. But in his heroic fervor, consumed by the overwhelming heat of the moment and the thrilling, intoxicating taste of success, Patroclus made a terrible, ultimately fatal mistake. He disregarded Achilles' strict warning. Carried away by his seemingly unstoppable momentum and the pursuit of fleeing enemies, he pursued the retreating Trojans too far, too close to the very walls of Troy, a place where even Achilles hesitated to venture without divine aid. His ambition and hubris led him into a direct, fateful confrontation with the greatest Trojan champion, Hector, on the open battlefield near the Chiron gates. Despite his valiant efforts, and despite wearing the armor of the seemingly invincible Achilles, Patroclus was, in the end, still a mortal man, not a demigod. His doom was sealed when the god Apollo, cloaked in a thick mist, silently intervened, striking a powerful blow that momentarily stunned Patroclus, loosening his helmet and breaking his spear. Then, Euphorbus, a less renowned but opportunistic Trojan warrior, struck the first human blow, wounding Patroclus in the back. Finally, Hector, recognizing his weakened state, delivered the mighty decisive spear thrust that claimed Patroclus's precious life. In this climactic and tragic moment, Hector not only claimed Patroclus's life, but also, with a triumphant roar, stripped the magnificent god-forged armor from his fallen foe, the very armor of Achilles, a profound symbol of his own triumph and a defiant challenge to the still absent Greek hero. The news of Patroclus's death and the humiliating loss of his armor would soon reach Achilles. The swift runner Antilochus, son of Nestor, bore the sorrowful tidings. His words struck Achilles with the force of a thunderbolt, igniting a grief so profound, a despair so absolute, and a rage so utterly consuming that it would shake the very foundations of the war. Achilles threw himself to the ground, tearing at his hair, covering himself in dust and ashes, letting out a terrible, piercing wail that echoed across the camp, heard even by his divine mother beneath the waves. This single, devastating loss would set in motion a new, even bloodier chapter of vengeance, a chain reaction of sorrow and fury. The tragic sacrifice of Patroclus, a true testament to unwavering loyalty and immense courage, became the ultimate devastating price paid for the hubris of kings and the stubborn pride of heroes, sealing the grim fate of many who would soon fall under the inevitable storm of Achilles' wrath. This single death, born from a private quarrel, would become the undeniable, pivotal turning point of the entire Trojan War, ushering in its final, most violent phase. The news of Patroclus's death, carried by the distraught Antilochus, struck Achilles with a force more devastating than any spear or arrow. It shattered the very foundations of his existence, leaving him utterly consumed by an agony he had never known. This was not merely the loss of a comrade. It was the loss of his soul's closest companion, his beloved brother in arms, the one person who truly understood him. Achilles' response was raw, primal grief. He threw himself onto the ground, tearing at his hair, covering his face with dust and ashes, and letting out a terrible, piercing wail, a cry of profound sorrow that echoed across the Achaean camp, reaching even his divine mother Thetis, beneath the waves of the sea. His lament was so profound that Thetis, hearing her son's anguish, rose from the deep, surrounded by her fellow Nereids, to comfort him, confirming to her the terrible news of Patroclus's demise and the loss of his god-forged armor. In that moment of absolute despair, however, Achilles' grief began to transmute, slowly but inevitably, into a blazing, all-consuming desire for vengeance. The sorrow for Patroclus's life tragically cut short, fueled an unparalleled rage, a fury unlike anything the world had ever witnessed. His quarrel with Agamemnon, which had defined his withdrawal, now seemed trivial in comparison. His only purpose, his singular obsession, became clear. He would return to the battlefields, not for Greek glory, not for wealth, but to avenge Patroclus. And his primary target would be Hector, the great Trojan hero who had taken his friend's life and stripped him of his armor. But Achilles was without his armor, lost to Hector. Recognizing the urgency and the depth of her son's renewed purpose, Thetis journeyed to the workshop of Hephaestus, the divine smith of the gods, on Mount Olympus. She pleaded with the lame god, imploring him to forge a new, magnificent set of armor for her son. Hephaestus, in his immense skill, crafted a truly wondrous panoply, a gleaming shield depicting the cosmos and the scenes of human life, a formidable helmet, a shining breastplate, and greaves of divine make. This new armor, radiating with otherworldly power, symbolized Achilles' rebirth as a warrior, not merely for glory, but for sacred retribution. Clad in this magnificent, god-forged armor, Achilles strode back to the Achaean assembly, his presence alone silencing the murmurs and disputes that had plagued the camp. He publicly reconciled with Agamemnon, casting aside their quarrel as insignificant in the face of his overwhelming grief and thirst for revenge. Agamemnon, for his part, humbly returned Briseis to Achilles, untouched, along with other generous gifts, acknowledging his past wrongs. But these reparations mattered little to Achilles now. His focus was solely on the battlefield, on the blood he intended to spill. With a chilling resolve, he prepared himself for the fight, mounted his war chariot, and roared a challenge that echoed across the plains of Troy, signaling his terrifying return. Once more, Achilles plunged into the heart of battle, but this time his ferocity knew no bounds. He was no longer fighting with skill or strategic purpose alone. He fought with a terrifying, almost inhuman bloodlust, driven by the profound grief for Patroclus and an unquenchable thirst for vengeance. The Trojan ranks, which had celebrated his absence, now recoiled in terror at the sight of his resplendent new armor and the sheer, unbridled fury in his eyes. He cut down countless opponents, showing no mercy, his spear and sword moving with a speed and power that seemed supernatural. He sought out Hector above all others, but any Trojan who stood in his path became a victim of his unrelenting wrath. The rivers themselves could not contain his rage. As Achilles pursued and slaughtered fleeing Trojans, he drove them into the great river Scamander, its waters becoming choked with bodies and stained crimson with their blood. The sheer scale of the carnage angered the river god Scamander, who could not tolerate such desecration of his sacred waters. The river god, personified as a raging current, rose in his wrath, creating immense waves and attempting to drown Achilles beneath his powerful torrents. Scamander roared, his voice like a mighty flood, threatening to sweep away the hero who had dared to defile his sacred domain. Achilles, finding himself battling not just mortals but an enraged deity, struggled against the overwhelming current. He was strong, but the power of a river god was immense, and he was on the verge of being swept away, facing certain death by drowning. In a desperate plea, he called out for divine aid. It was then that Hephaestus, the very god who had forged his new armor, intervened once more. To save Achilles from the enraged Scamander, Hephaestus unleashed torrents of fiery flames, causing the river waters to boil and evaporate, drying up part of its mighty course. The heat was so intense that the river god was forced to retreat, his sacred waters diminishing under the scorching assault. Achilles was thus saved from certain death, a testament to the god's continued involvement in his extraordinary, fated life. With the river god defeated, Achilles' path to vengeance was clear. His ultimate challenge now stood before him. Hector, the greatest fighter among the Trojans, the slayer of Patroclus, was finally within reach of his spear. The confrontation that would define the rest of the war, a duel prophesied and long awaited, was now inevitable. Achilles, his heart burning with an all-consuming desire for retribution, would not rest until Patroclus was avenged, no matter the cost. With the raging river god Scamander finally subdued, his waters still simmering from Hephaestus's fiery assault, Achilles' path to ultimate vengeance stood clear and unobstructed. His singular, consuming focus narrowed to one target, one final, ultimate challenge: Hector. The greatest defender of Troy, the valiant leader of its armies, and, most agonizingly for Achilles, the slayer of his beloved Patroclus, now remained as the solitary impediment to his vengeance. This was the confrontation that had been prophesied by seers and gods alike. A duel long awaited, a climax building through years of war. And now, fueled by an all-consuming grief and an unyielding burning rage, it was utterly, tragically inevitable. The vast, blood-soaked plains outside Troy, which had witnessed countless skirmishes and countless deaths, now seemed to hold their very breath, hushed in anticipation, poised for this singular, defining duel that would decide the fate of Troy and forever etch itself into the annals of legend. When Achilles finally drew near, radiating an almost divine and terrifying aura of wrath, that seemed to make the very air tremble, Hector, in a desperate final attempt to avoid needless bloodshed and ensure a measure of honor in defeat, tried to reach an agreement. His voice, perhaps trembling slightly but firm in its intent, proposed a solemn pact. The defeated warrior, whoever he might be, would be returned to his people for a proper, respectful, and honorable funeral. This was a common and cherished code among warriors of the time, a sacred understanding even between the bitterest enemies, meant to ensure dignity in death. But Achilles, his heart utterly hardened by his overwhelming grief and his singular, burning desire for retribution, scorned the very idea of such a compassionate agreement. His voice, cold and sharp as a honed blade, retorted with an absolute, chilling finality that there could be no true pact between them, no understanding, no mercy. Between lions and men, a stark metaphor implying the predatory beast and its helpless prey. He vowed, with chilling conviction, that one of them would surely fall that day, and that no quarter, no shred of compassion would be given to the vanquished. His words carried the weight of an unbreakable oath, sealed by the bitter tears he had shed for Patroclus and the agonizing pain of his loss. The stage was set not for a duel of chivalry or honor, but for an act of pure, unadulterated vengeance, a reckoning that would leave an indelible mark on both myth and history. The great fight between Achilles and Hector was so profoundly important, so utterly charged with dramatic tension and epic significance, that its intricate details have been sung by poets for millennia, echoing through the ages as perhaps the most famous single combat in all of ancient literature. For a moment, even the Olympian gods themselves held their breath, poised between favor and grim satisfaction, some, like Apollo, still favoring the valiant Hector, while others watched with grim approval as Achilles pursued his rightful, terrible vengeance. They circled each other with agonizing slowness, two titans of the battlefield, their movements precise, their strategies honed by years of relentless warfare. Hector, though incredibly brave and remarkably skilled, was ultimately mortal, facing a warrior whose very existence was touched by divinity, and whose spirit was now driven by an unprecedented, all-consuming rage. The air crackled with their unspoken challenge, their eyes locked in a silent, deadly communion. Achilles, empowered by Hephaestus's divinely crafted armor, and the grim purpose that burned in his heart, relentlessly pursued Hector. 3 times they raced around the mighty walls of Troy, a desperate chase witnessed by gods and mortals alike. During this relentless pursuit, divine intervention once again played its part. The goddess Athena subtly assisted Achilles, at times appearing to Hector in disguise, misleading him. Finally, the tide turned decisively when Apollo, Hector's divine protector, chose to abandon him to his fate. The true combat then began. Hector threw his spear, only for it to glance harmlessly off Achilles' new shield. Achilles, with his counter-throw, found the single vulnerable point in Hector's own magnificent, borrowed armor, a narrow opening near the neck where the collarbone met the shoulder, the one place not protected by the spoils of Patroclus. With one perfect, unerring blow of his spear, a strike imbued with all his grief and fury, Achilles mortally wounded the Trojan prince. Hector fell, his life ebbing away, the last hopes of Troy falling with him, crumbling into dust as their champion lay dying. With his dying breath, Hector pleaded once more for his body to be returned to his family for proper burial, and chillingly, He prophesied Achilles' own imminent death, struck down by Paris at the Scaean Gate. With Hector's death, all hope of ultimate victory for the Trojans vanished like smoke in the wind, dissipating into the cold morning air. Their greatest protector, their champion, their very shield against the relentless Achaean onslaught, was gone. But Achilles' insatiable rage was not yet sated. In a brutal act that shocked even some of his own hardened comrades, and deeply violated the ancient, revered codes of warfare regarding fallen foes, he utterly dishonored Hector's body. Tying the corpse's feet to the back of his swift war chariot, Achilles brutally dragged Hector's lifeless, dust-covered form around the mighty walls of Troy, again and again in full agonizing view of its weeping citizens, King Priam, Kilba, and all the Trojan people watched in unimaginable horror and despair from the ramparts as their beloved champion's body was savagely defiled, bounced and bruised by the chariot's wheels. This cruel act was a public, horrifying display of vengeance, meant to send a chilling message of utter despair to the besieged city and to thoroughly, definitively avenge the mutilation of Patroclus's own body and the theft of his sacred armor. For 12 agonizing days, Achilles, still consumed by his profound fury, continued this horrific ritual, dragging Hector's body around Patroclus's tomb each morning, refusing to allow it proper burial or rest. However, even in his all-consuming wrath, a flicker of profound humanity, perhaps influenced by the subtle urging of the compassionate gods, still remained. One night, a frail, elderly figure arrived at Achilles' tent, a figure who had slipped past the watchful Greek guards under the miraculous guidance of the messenger god Hermes. It was King Priam of Troy, Hector's venerable father, who performed an act of unimaginable courage and humility. The aged king, utterly broken by grief, knelt at the feet of the very warrior who had just mercilessly killed his dearest son and so grievously desecrated his body. With tears streaming down his face and with trembling hands, Priam humbly kissed Achilles' terrible hands, the hands that had taken his son's life. He begged Achilles, appealing to his own memory of his revered father Peleus and the profound grief he would feel if Peleus were to suffer such a loss. Achilles was deeply, profoundly moved by this extraordinary gesture of paternal love and absolute desperation. Priam's immense courage, his regal dignity even in utter defeat, and his raw, unadulterated grief resonated with Achilles' own profound sorrow for Patroclus. In that intensely human moment, the mighty warrior saw not his bitterest enemy's father, but a grieving old man, much like his own beloved father might one day be, suffering an unbearable loss. Overcome by a wave of unexpected empathy, Achilles wept alongside Priam, shedding tears not for Hector, but for Patroclus, for the shared tragedy of loss, and for the common human suffering that transcended the brutal realities of war. He gently raised the old king, offered him comfort, and, honoring his courageous request, finally allowed Priam to take his beloved son's body back to Troy for proper funeral rites. In an astonishing act of temporary peace, Achilles even granted a temporary truce for Hector's elaborate funeral, demonstrating a rare, poignant moment of compassion amidst his raging fury. This powerful, intensely human exchange, meticulously recorded for all time in the great epic poems, became one of the most poignant and morally complex episodes in the entire Trojan War, a testament to the intricate, often contradictory nature of even the greatest, most fearsome heroes. The great duel was done, the vengeance exacted, and for a brief, somber period, the sounds of war fell silent, replaced by the mournful rites of burial. With Hector's fall, and the poignant truce observed for his funeral rites, a brief, somber quiet descended upon the plains of Troy. Yet, even as the Trojans mourned their greatest champion, the war was far from over. The Greeks, renewed in spirit by Achilles' devastating return, now pressed their advantage. And Achilles himself, though his primary vengeance was exacted, continued to fight with an unparalleled ferocity, his presence alone a constant, terrifying threat to Troy. He was still the embodiment of war, a living, breathing force of nature on the battlefield. Troy, however, was not yet entirely defeated. From distant lands, new, formidable allies arrived, drawn by the call of destiny and a desire to aid the besieged city. First came the legendary Amazons, a fearsome tribe of warrior women, led by their queen, Penthesilea. She was a figure of immense bravery and skill, a formidable opponent who inspired awe even among the Greeks. She fought with a ferocity that matched Achilles' own, cutting down Greek heroes and challenging their finest. Achilles confronted her in single combat, a duel of two extraordinary warriors. His initial ferocity was absolute, driven by his warrior's instinct. He struck her down, a swift and decisive blow. But in the moment of her death, as her helmet was removed, Achilles looked upon her face and, to his astonishment, saw not just an enemy, but a woman of breathtaking beauty and immense courage. A profound, almost heartbreaking regret washed over him. He felt a sudden, poignant sorrow for having taken such a magnificent life, a rare glimpse of compassion amidst his relentless path of destruction. Soon after, another mighty ally arrived to bolster Troy's defenses, Memnon, the powerful king of the Ethiopians, son of Eos, the goddess of dawn. He was a majestic figure, possessing strength and courage that rivaled Achilles himself. Their duel was another epic confrontation, a clash between two demigods, each fighting with the might of their divine heritage. The two champions met in a battle of immense skill and raw power, their blows shaking the very earth. Even Zeus, the king of the gods, watched this titanic struggle with keen interest, weighing their fates on his golden scales. Ultimately, destiny favored Achilles. With a final, devastating blow, he defeated Memnon, confirming his unmatched supremacy on the battlefield, even against opponents of nearly equal strength. These later triumphs solidified Achilles' reputation, ensuring his name would forever be synonymous with unconquerable might, a warrior who had faced and overcome the greatest champions of the age. Yet, despite his continued awe-inspiring victories, the shadow of an ancient prophecy loomed ever larger over Achilles. From the moment of his miraculous birth, it had been foretold that his life, though glorious, would be tragically short. Every victory, every act of vengeance, brought him closer to this inescapable fate. There was an unspoken tension, a sense of foreboding that settled over the narrative, as if the very air whispered of his approaching end. The gods, who had so often intervened in his life, both to aid and to test him, were now aligning the final pieces of his destiny. His ultimate demise arrived not in glorious open combat against a worthy foe in fair fight, but through a confluence of divine machination and a subtle, mortal hand. One fateful day, as the Achaean forces pressed their assault against the walls of Troy, a seemingly innocuous arrow was loosed. It was shot by Paris, the very prince of Troy, whose abduction of Helen had sparked this entire devastating war. Paris, often portrayed as more lover than warrior, was guided in this moment not by his own skill alone, but by the unseen hand of the god Apollo. The god, who had long favored the Trojans and still held a grudge against Achilles for past slights, precisely guided Paris's arrow through the air. The arrow, imbued with divine purpose, found its single, mythical target, Achilles' vulnerable heel. That tiny, unblessed spot, the only part of his body not touched by the sacred waters of the river Styx during his infancy, became the undoing of the greatest warrior. The impact was instant, the shock profound. The mighty Achilles, who had faced 1,000 spears and swords without flinching, felt a sudden, agonizing pain that coursed through his entire being. He staggered, then fell a colossus brought down by what seemed like the weakest of blows, a symbol of his one fateful flaw. His legendary roar turned into a final gasp, and the invincible Achilles, the glory of the Achaeans, breathed his last on the Trojan plain. The grief that swept through the Greek camp at his death was immense, a wave of despair that echoed the anguish felt by the Trojans at Hector's fall. A fierce battle erupted over His funeral was a somber affair, a profound mark of respect for the hero who had reshaped the war. His body, now mortal and still, was honored with elaborate rites, and his ashes were laid to rest beside those of his beloved Patroclus, a testament to their unbreakable bond in life and in death. Though his life was indeed short, Achilles achieved the eternal glory he had always sought. His name resonated throughout the ancient world and continues to echo through time, a testament to his unmatched bravery and prowess. The story of Achilles has endured for millennia, becoming far more than a mere historical account. It is a profound exploration of heroic ideals, of the complex interplay between loyalty and rage, of the sacrifices demanded by war, and of the enduring pain of loss. The concept of the Achilles heel has passed into common language, symbolizing a singular, fatal weakness despite overwhelming strength. His tale, immortalized in epic poems like Homer's Iliad, continues to inspire and instruct, reminding us of the fierce pursuit of honor, the devastating consequences of pride, and the poignant, beautiful, yet often tragic nature of human existence. Achilles, the greatest of Greek warriors, found his eternal immortality not in escaping his fate, but in embracing it, transforming his brief, brilliant life into an enduring legend that continues to captivate hearts and minds to this very day. The immediate aftermath of Achilles' death sent a profound wave of despair through the entire Achaean encampment. Their greatest champion, the formidable force who had single-handedly turned the tide of the war, lay lifeless. The invincible Achilles, brought low by a seemingly insignificant wound, left behind a void that no other warrior could truly fill. The very air around Troy seemed to hold its breath, hushed in a collective grief that transcended the usual clamor of war. The Greek leaders knew, instinctively, that such a hero, touched by divinity and unparalleled in his might, demanded a funeral worthy of his monumental glory and tragic end. It was not merely a duty. It was a sacred honor, a final, public testament to his extraordinary life. Preparations for his funeral rites were begun with utmost solemnity and reverence. His body, retrieved from the battlefield after a fierce struggle by Ajax the Great and Odysseus, was meticulously prepared. A massive funeral pyre was constructed, towering towards the heavens, symbolizing his ascension to the realm of heroes. The Achaean army gathered, their ranks swelling with chieftains and common soldiers alike, all united in their sorrow. Laments filled the air, the collective cries of men mourning a loss that fell. Following these solemn rites, as was the ancient tradition for heroes of such stature, the Greeks held magnificent funeral games in honor of Achilles. These contests were more than just athletic displays. They were a vital part of the mourning process, a way to channel profound grief into feats of strength and skill, and to celebrate the enduring excellence that Achilles himself had embodied. The atmosphere was one of solemn grandeur, yet also charged with a vibrant, competitive spirit, a living tribute to the warrior who had so valued physical prowess. Champions from across the Greek forces stepped forward to compete, demonstrating their own valor in various events. There were thrilling chariot races, where swift horses thundered across the plains, guided by expert drivers like Diomedes, Antilochus, and Menelaus, their chariots churning up dust in their wake, vying for victory and glorious prizes. Brutal boxing matches tested the raw power and endurance of the strongest heroes, while intricate wrestling bouts showcased skill, technique, and unwavering determination. The swiftness of feet was displayed in heated foot races, and precision was paramount in contests of archery and spear throwing. Each contest was a miniature epic, reflecting the martial spirit of the fallen hero and providing a powerful, if temporary, distraction from the grim realities of the war. However, amidst these grand displays of prowess, another, far more profound and ultimately tragic contest was unfolding, a dispute that would have devastating consequences for one of Greece's greatest remaining heroes. This was the intense and fateful argument over who deserved to inherit Achilles' divine armor. This gleaming panoply, forged by Hephaestus himself, was not merely a set of protective gear. It was a potent symbol of Achilles' unparalleled strength, his unmatched courage, and his legacy as the greatest warrior of his generation. To claim it was to claim Achilles' mantle, to be recognized as his worthy successor. The two main claimants were Ajax the Great, the towering, immensely strong warrior of Salamis, and the cunning, eloquent Odysseus, the resourceful king of Ithaca. Their claims were vastly different, reflecting their very natures. Ajax, a man of immense physical might and straightforward heroism, argued his case based on his undeniable deeds. He spoke of his unwavering loyalty, his steadfast courage in battle, and most powerfully, his direct actions in retrieving Achilles' body from the thickest of the Trojan melee, protecting it with his massive shield while others faltered. He represented the brute strength and direct combat prowess that Achilles had embodied, arguing that his strength and courage made him the natural heir. Odysseus, on the other hand, a master of words and strategic thought, presented his claim based on his cunning and his invaluable contributions to the overall war effort, contributions that often relied on intellect rather than pure physical might. He spoke of his strategic planning, his diplomatic skill, his ability to outwit the Trojans, and his crucial role in bringing Achilles himself to Troy in the first place. He argued that the war was not won by brute force alone, but by wisdom and foresight, qualities he possessed in abundance and which the Greeks would need more than ever now that Achilles was gone. He represented the adaptable, intelligent leadership necessary for future victory. The contest was not decided by a physical duel, as might have been expected for such a prize, but through a debate before the assembled Greek leaders who acted as arbitrators. In some versions of the myth, even Trojan captives were brought in to witness the arguments and perhaps cast a symbolic vote, their perspective adding a layer of ironic insight. After much deliberation, swayed by Odysseus's eloquent arguments, his strategic foresight, and perhaps influenced by the subtle nudges of the goddess Athena who favored him, the Greek leaders made their fateful decision. They awarded the magnificent, divine armor of Achilles not to the mighty Ajax, but to the cunning Odysseus. This decision was a profound, catastrophic blow to Ajax. He was a man of immense pride, whose honor was everything. To be passed over, especially in favor of Odysseus, a man he perhaps viewed as less direct, less heroic, in the traditional sense, was an unbearable humiliation. It was a rejection of his worth, a denial of his steadfast loyalty and his immense contributions to the Achaean cause. The loss of the armor, which he felt was rightfully his, plunged him into a terrifying spiral of despair and uncontrollable rage. His mind, already strained by the prolonged war and the grief of Achilles' death, began to unravel. Driven to madness by his wounded pride and a profound sense of injustice, perhaps even influenced by the vengeful goddess Athena, Ajax stumbled from the assembly. In his delusion, he mistook the Greek army's flock of sheep and cattle for the chieftains who had judged against him. In a fit of furious, uncontrollable rage, he slaughtered them all, believing he was exacting a bloody revenge on Agamemnon, Odysseus, and the other leaders who had scorned him. When the madness finally lifted, and he awoke to the horrifying realization of what he had done, the shameful, senseless slaughter of innocent animals, mistaken for his comrades, the shame was utterly overwhelming. He saw his honor irrevocably stained, his reputation destroyed, his heroic legacy reduced to a mockery. Unable to live with such unbearable dishonor, Ajax made the ultimate, tragic choice. He took his own life, falling upon the very sword that Hector had given him as a gift during an earlier, more honorable exchange of challenges. It was a bitterly ironic end, a proud warrior choosing death by the hand of his former enemy's gift rather than endure the living shame of his perceived disgrace. His suicide was a profound loss for the Achaeans, depriving them of another great warrior in such a senseless and heart-wrenching way. This contest, meant to honor the fallen Achilles, inadvertently led to another great tragedy, highlighting the destructive power of pride, the complexities of justice, and the brutal consequences of perceived injustice, even among allies. It underscored that even in death, Achilles' immense presence continued to spark major events and shape the fates of those he left behind. The tragic death of Achilles, followed by the profound and deeply unsettling outcome of the contest for his divine armor, marked a pivotal turning point in the long, weary Trojan War. His demise, alongside the subsequent loss of Ajax the Great, signaled the end of an era, an age where individual heroic strength and singular combat prowess could, seemingly, determine the fate of entire campaigns. For 10 grueling years, the Achaean forces had relied heavily on the unmatched might of heroes like Achilles to confront Troy's champions and break its formidable defenses. But now, with their greatest warrior gone, and the city of Troy still standing defiant behind its colossal walls, the Greeks faced a stark and desperate reality. Direct assault, reliant on brute force, was simply no longer a viable path to victory. The siege had stalled, and the morale of the army, despite the recent triumphs, was fragile. It was in this desperate strategic void that a different kind of heroism began to ascend, one characterized not by the spear and shield, but by the keen intellect and the resourceful mind. This new phase of the war was championed by Odysseus, the very hero who had, by cunning words and wise counsel, won the right to Achilles' armor. It was as if the mantle of leadership, once defined by physical invincibility, had now passed to the realm of strategic brilliance. The Greeks realized that if Troy could not be taken by sheer force, it would have to be taken by ingenuity, by deception, by a stratagem so audacious, so unprecedented, that it might just bypass the city's impregnable defenses entirely. The wisdom of various prophecies, some of which had been made before the war, also began to coalesce, guiding their thoughts towards new, unexpected solutions. It was from the fertile and cunning mind of Odysseus that the most daring and ingenious plan of the entire war was conceived: the construction of the legendary Trojan horse. This was not a weapon of direct destruction, but a tool of insidious entry, designed to trick Troy into welcoming its own downfall. The audacity of the plan was breathtaking. Its success would rely entirely on the Trojans' pride, their desperation for peace, and their unsuspecting nature. The very idea seemed fantastical, yet in their dire circumstances, it offered the only glimmer of hope. Under Odysseus's meticulous guidance, the Greeks set about constructing this colossal wooden effigy. The master craftsman Apius, known for his skill with wood and his immense strength, was tasked with its construction. Over days, perhaps weeks, a monstrous hollow horse began to take shape, fashioned from the finest fir wood, its massive timbers hewn and fitted with incredible precision. Its sheer scale was immense, dwarfing ordinary structures, and its very appearance was designed to inspire awe. Within its vast hollow belly, a hidden chamber was crafted, capable of concealing a select group of elite Achaean warriors, the very best, hand-picked by Odysseus for their courage, discipline, and absolute loyalty. Among those who bravely entered its dark interior were Odysseus himself, Menelaus, Diomedes, and many others, including, in some traditions, even Neoptolemus, Achilles' own son, brought to Troy to fulfill a prophecy. Once the colossal horse was completed, the meticulously planned deception began. The main Greek fleet, with calculated dramatic flair, sailed away from the Trojan shore, disappearing behind the nearby island of Tenedos, creating the convincing illusion that they had finally abandoned the long siege and were returning home in defeat. They left behind only the gigantic wooden horse, standing isolated on the deserted beach, and one Greek soldier named Sinon, a master of deceit and persuasive rhetoric. Sinon's role was crucial. He presented himself to the bewildered Trojans as a lone, abandoned Greek, a victim left behind by his vengeful countrymen. Weeping and feigning distress, he wove an elaborate, meticulously crafted lie. He claimed that the Greeks had indeed given up and departed, but that the colossal wooden horse was an offering to the goddess Athena, meant to atone for their previous sacrileges against her and to ensure a safe journey home. He cunningly explained that the horse was built so massive specifically to prevent the Trojans from bringing it into their city, for if they were to defile it or simply ignore it, the goddess's wrath would fall upon Troy instead of the retreating Achaeans. But if the Trojans were to bring it within their walls, he claimed, it would bring immense prosperity and ultimate victory to their city. His story was incredibly convincing, a tapestry of half-truths and calculated lies, designed to appeal to the Trojans' deepest desires for peace and their piety towards the gods. Despite the brilliance of Sinon's deception, there were voices of caution within Troy. The priest Laocoon, renowned for his wisdom, vehemently warned his people, famously exclaiming, "Beware of Greeks even when they bring gifts." He urged them to burn the horse, or at least to inspect its belly for hidden warriors, even striking it with his spear, which gave forth a hollow sound. The prophetess, Cassandra, blessed with foresight but cursed never to be believed, also screamed her warnings, proclaiming the doom hidden within the wooden belly. But their desperate pleas fell on deaf ears. Divine intervention once again tilted the scales of fate. As Laocoon offered sacrifice to Poseidon, two monstrous sea serpents rose from the waves, swiftly engulfing and strangling both him and his innocent sons. This horrifying spectacle was interpreted by the Trojans as a clear sign of divine displeasure with Laocoon's skepticism, confirming Sinon's story and removing the last powerful voices of doubt. Convinced by Sinon's elaborate tale and the chilling omen of the serpents, the Trojans erupted in joyous celebration, believing the long, terrible war was finally over. With immense effort and triumphant shouts, they set about the arduous task of bringing the massive horse into their city. It was so colossal that they had to dismantle a section of their formidable city wall, a wall that had stood unbroken for a decade, just to pull the wooden behemoth through. They labored through the day, dragging the horse on rollers, triumphantly positioning it in the heart of Troy, perhaps near Athena's temple. The city resonated with feasting, dancing, and jubilant songs, celebrating what they believed was their ultimate, hard-won victory and the dawn of a new era of peace. That night, as the city of Troy slept in its victorious revelry, exhaustion finally settling upon its celebrating inhabitants, silence slowly descended upon the once bustling streets. Under the cover of darkness, the elite Greek warriors, who had endured hours of cramped confinement within the wooden horse's belly, stealthily emerged. Odysseus led the way, his face grim with determination. They quickly overpowered the few remaining guards, and then a crucial step signaled the waiting Greek fleet, which had secretly returned from Tenedos under the cloak of night. The gates of Troy, the very gates that had withstood 10 years of siege, were now thrown open from within. The entire Greek army, silently disembarking from their ships, poured into the unsuspecting city. What followed was the complete, brutal, and utterly devastating sacking of Troy. The peaceful celebration of moments before turned into a night of unimaginable chaos, fire, and widespread slaughter. The city was set ablaze, its ancient buildings consumed by towering flames. The sounds of joy were replaced by the screams of the innocent, the clash of swords, and the triumphant roars of the Greek invaders. No mercy was shown as the Greeks exacted their vengeance for years of war and loss. By dawn, the once proud city of Troy, famed for its impenetrable walls and its valiant defenders, lay in ruins, burnt, plundered, and utterly defeated. The long, bloody mission of the Greek expedition had finally, decisively, been completed. And so, Troy fell not by the direct, overwhelming might of a hero like Achilles, whose absence had paradoxically paved the way for this new approach. Rather, it fell through the cleverness and strategic brilliance embodied by Odysseus, the very hero who had inherited Achilles' armor. This ultimate victory, though achieved by cunning and deceit, was undeniably set in motion by the profound events surrounding Achilles, his life, his rage, and ultimately his death, which necessitated a new, indirect path to triumph. His fierce spirit, his unrelenting desire for victory for the Achaeans, his very legacy, permeated the final, ingenious strategy. The fall of Troy, therefore, stands as a testament to a profound shift in the nature of ancient warfare, from an age where individual heroic strength reigned supreme to an era where ingenuity, strategic thinking, and subtle manipulation held sway. Achilles' story, both his life and his death, had helped to usher in this new epic of warfare, solidifying his enduring shadow even over the very destruction he did not live to witness. As the glorious yet brutal city of Troy finally fell, consumed by fire and conquered by the very stratagems that Achilles' absence had necessitated, the great mission of the Achaean expedition was at last complete. The victorious Greeks, having avenged their honor and reclaimed Helen, prepared for their long, arduous journeys home, their memories forever etched with the triumphs and tragedies they had witnessed. But for Achilles, the war was over in a more profound, more permanent sense. His mortal journey had concluded on the blood-soaked plains outside Troy, yet his story, far from ending, was just beginning its timeless ascent into the realm of myth and eternal legend. For heroes, though mortal in flesh and blood, achieve a different, more profound kind of immortality through the enduring power of their stories, their deeds echoing through the ages. Centuries after the fall of Troy, the renowned Greek hero Odysseus, on his own epic journey home, was forced to venture into the very realm of the dead, the bleak and shadowy underworld. There, in that desolate land of shades where specters of the departed wandered aimlessly, he encountered many figures from his past, including the mighty Achilles. The meeting was profoundly poignant. Achilles' shade, though still recognizable, was a mere shadow of his former glorious self, stripped of his formidable strength and the vibrant life that had once defined him. The atmosphere of the underworld was one of perpetual gloom, a stark contrast to the sun-drenched battlefields and the vibrant life Achilles had known. In this poignant encounter, Odysseus attempted to comfort Achilles, praising his glorious life and his continued renown even in death. Yet, Achilles' response was a chilling, deeply human lament, words that would resonate through philosophy for millennia. "I would rather be a serf on earth, bound to a portionless man," he declared, his voice a mere whisper from the realm of shadows, "than king of all these perished dead." This statement, coming from the proud, glory-hungry warrior who had chosen a short life of fame over a long life of obscurity, revealed a profound, almost heartbreaking shift in his perspective. It was a moment of stark realization, a poignant reflection on the bittersweet nature of his chosen path. It underscored that even the grandest glory might not compare to the simple warmth of life, proving that even the most formidable heroes could harbor deep, universal regrets. The relentless pursuit of honor, he seemed to acknowledge, came at an ultimate, perhaps too high, a cost. Yet, despite this somber depiction in the underworld, other myths and traditions whispered of a more glorious afterlife for Achilles. Some legends recounted that after his death, he was transported to Leuc, the White Island, a mythical paradise located in the Black Sea. Here, it was believed, he lived a blessed, heroic existence, freed from the earthly struggles, perhaps even married to powerful figures like Medea or Iphigenia. This alternate narrative offered a vision of true immortality, a heroic paradise that contrasted sharply with the bleakness of Hades, ensuring that Achilles was not merely a tragic figure, but one who transcended death to a more profound Greek world, particularly in his native Thessaly, and in regions like Sparta. Achilles was venerated as a cult hero, with shrines and festivals dedicated to his memory, a testament to his profound impact on the collective psyche. The enduring legacy of Achilles is truly immeasurable, stretching far beyond the confines of ancient Greece. He stands as the quintessential embodiment of heroic ideals, unmatched strength, unparalleled courage, exquisite skill in combat, unwavering loyalty to his friends, and an intense, burning passion that defined his every action. Yet, he is also the epitome of the tragic hero, whose very greatness is intertwined with his fatal flaws, his uncontrollable rage, his unyielding pride, his susceptibility to insult. These very human flaws led not only to his own downfall, but also to the immense suffering of those around him, particularly his beloved Patroclus. His story is a timeless exploration of the profound, often devastating cost of glory and the bitter wages of unbridled hubris. The concept of the Achilles heel, that single, vulnerable spot, has transcended its mythological origins to become an indispensable idiom in common language, symbolizing a seemingly small but fatal weakness despite overwhelming strength. It is a constant reminder of the universal truth that even the most formidable among us harbor vulnerabilities. His epic tale, meticulously woven by the bard Homer in the monumental Iliad, serves as a foundational text of Western literature, shaping the very structure of epic poetry, tragedy, and the exploration of human character. Throughout history, countless artists, from ancient sculptors and vase painters to Renaissance masters and modern film, grief and destiny. The paradox of Achilles' immortality is perhaps his most enduring lesson. He consciously chose a short life filled with glorious fame over a long life of quiet anonymity, and in this choice, he achieved precisely the eternal renown he craved. His name does not simply exist in dusty scrolls. It resonates as a vibrant symbol of eternal glory, profound passion, and poignant tragedy. He represents the complex, contradictory nature of heroism itself, the magnificent strengths and the heartbreaking weaknesses that define the human condition. His unique narrative, forever echoing through the ages, continues to captivate hearts and minds across cultures and centuries, urging us to reflect on our own choices, our own vulnerabilities, and the indelible marks we leave upon the world. And so, the legend of Achilles, the greatest of Greek warriors, lives on, an eternal testament to a life lived with extraordinary intensity, forever etched into the very fabric of human storytelling.